Hi everyone, welcome to Peggy Dean's Summer Workshop Retreat. I'm Liz Kohler Brown. I'm an artist, designer, and teacher, and we're going to look at a quick process for doing some block lettering that you can do to get some bold, chunky lettering on the page that you could immediately post on Instagram. So let's move the camera down to the table and we'll get started. So I want to share with you all a workbook I made that just takes you through these steps so that you can refer to those, especially because each letter kind of has its own intricacies, so you may want to have this up as you're working. So to get this workbook and all the brushes I'm going to share with you today, you'll go to the link on my website, which will be linked with this video. Also, if you want to just type it in, it's lizkohlerbrown.com/block-lettering-downloads. So once you get on that page, you'll see where you can enter to have me email you all of the resources. Once you get that email, you'll see all of the downloads that I mentioned throughout this workshop. So there's some Procreate brushes, some color palettes, a workbook, and then a smaller version of that if you're working on an older iPad, and the workbook as a PDF if you don't have an iPad at all or you just want to use a different device. So that's how you get all of these brushes and resources that I'm going to mention. And of course you can just click download and then choose open in Procreate for each of those. So once you get the workbook, you can flip through here and see that each layer is a different page. So we're going to go through this process that you'll see in the workbook to create this artwork today. And you'll also see there are some stamps included. So I just wanted to give you an example of what you could do with these stamps. So this heart stamp, for example, you can use that as a template to do some heart-shaped block lettering. So we're going to go through how to do this as we go through this process today. And of course, I made some palettes for you, and you can download those on the email as well. So let's dig in. I'm going to go back to the gallery, create a new document, and I like to work at 3000 by 3000 pixels. Of course, work at any size that works for your style here. What I love about block lettering is that you can literally fit it into any shape, and you can kind of do some fun play on different shapes. What I'm going to use is one of these stamps from the brush set that I shared with you. So if you want to start with one of these stamps or just follow me, you can do that exactly. So here is the sun stamp. That's what I'm going to use. And I'll just start by choosing any color and touching with my finger. So obviously that's a little small. So I'm going to make it bigger, a little bit bigger. And I'm using my finger because if you use the stylus, it'll be a different size each time. So that's getting me a reliable size just using my finger. So I like that size. I like to leave a little bit of space on the border. So I just tap the move tool and I'm fitting that into place. So I want the lettering to be on the sun here. So I need to think about how I want it to be laid out. First of all, when I do block lettering, I like to really accentuate different angles and shapes. So rather than just going across or just going like diagonal, I kind of do wavy movements. Of course, do this however you want, but that's just my personal style. So I like this. I like how the lettering's not just in lines. It's kind of, each word is gonna meet in different areas, and you'll see how that plays out as we start sketching. Again, I'm doing this on a different layer, so it's not affecting my orange color down here. Next, I'm just going to go through and write whatever the word is that I want to use. So I find that longer quotes do really well with block lettering. So, you know, a 2 or 3 word phrase might not be quite enough. You might want to do something a little longer. So feel free to just copy me. I'm just going to write bold and super chunky block lettering, just like you see in the image on the front of the workbook. So I didn't leave enough space, so I'm just going to keep writing. Then I can grab the selection tool, select all of that text, tap the move tool, select freeform, and just scrunch it in. So that's the kind of spacing I'm going to need to do to make sure all of that stuff fits in. And I've intentionally put a lot of letters on this line, and then this one's just going to say block. So what that does is create some variation between these really tight spaces and really wide open spaces. So you might consider doing that, just kind of stretching out the text in one area and then bunching it together in another. And you can see this is a super rough sketch. This doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's really just to get the spacing of your letters. And I like to step back at this point and make sure my letters are straight up and down. I'll often do things diagonally, so I just go through and check that. I'm going to create a new layer and reduce the opacity of this previous layer. And then I'll just go through and redraw these so it fits a little bit better in the space. And, you know, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's really just playing around with spacing things out in different ways. So I need to work on this word chunky because that's really wasn't fitting in well last time. So I'm just going to go through here. And I'm still having space issues, so I'm going to get that word super and squish that a little more. So this is part of the process of block lettering. You've just got to go through and kind of resize things and play around with the spacing until everything fits. Okay, I like that because I like how the Y kind of gets pushed down. And the S starts like in the middle of the previous word. So just getting that variation in there. Okay, so I'm happy with how this is laid out. So the next thing I need to do is start erasing the spaces. So the cool thing about block lettering is, whereas with other types of lettering, you are creating the letters, in block lettering, you're erasing space to create letters. So what I'm going to grab here is, in the block lettering set, this fluid ink brush, and I'm going to reduce the size of that so it's kind of the same width, a little bit smaller than these sun rays. And the first thing I'd like to do is just go through and create a kind of a wavy separator between the lines. So I'm erasing directly on this sun layer. And the reason I do it wavy is because I found if you just do them straight across, they look kind of fake, and I don't know, it's not very loose like block lettering normally is. So for me, I like doing the waves, and I kind of make it wave to match the letter. So I'll go like under this B, under this L, under this O, just to kind of make those little lumps. And now I just need to start erasing to reveal the letters. So for an O, for example, all you really need to do is erase a tiny little shape. So that alone turns that into an O. So once I reveal this B, I'm just going to do this and maybe round that O a little bit. Then this B, I can do a little oval and a little oval. So you can take away as much as you want, of course. But what I like to do is challenge myself to take away as little as possible. So for an L, for example, all you really need to take away is this little rectangle up here, and that turns it into an L. So same thing for a D, but we do need that rounded front for the D so people don't think it's an O. So there's my D. Of course, we need to make a little bit of space in between two words, so I do carve a little bit of extra space when I'm going in between two words. And the N, I'm going to grab a little from the bottom and a little triangle on the top. Little triangle and a little trapezoid down here. So you can take away as little or as much as you want. I'm going to make that sketch semi-transparent so it's not quite so distracting. So now if you sit back, you can see that's bold, and so of course go as extreme as you want with these. I'm going to do the same process with the B. One thing that you'll notice is you can kind of choose what you want these interior shapes to look like. So for example, you could do big circles, you could do tiny, tiny slivers. You really just have to play around with it and maybe try carving the same quote in 4 different ways and just see which one kind of speaks to your personal style. I'm doing kind of a rounded shape here for that O. Another thing I tend to do is go through, and if there's some really super sharp areas, I just round those off a little bit. You don't have to do that process, but I find that it just cleans it up a little bit, makes it look a little bit more professional. So one thing I love about this block lettering process is how fast it is. If you thought of a quote that you wanted to put on Instagram, for example, you could do one of these in, 5 or 10 minutes, really, depending on the size of the quote. Once you get down the process of just carving these little shapes out, it just gets easier and easier, and you can kind of go on autopilot, maybe listen to something or watch something while you do it. So I really like how that C turned out. I was going to do more of a rounded here, but I think it kind of looks nice as a rectangle, so I'm going to stick with that. So our K, we need a tiny little triangle, and a triangle. So I don't usually erase spaces this big. Probably what I would do instead is cut that down a little bit, and then I can bring some other letter into this space. So let's say, for example, just gonna cover that up here. That way this N right here can just dip up into that space. So I'm trying to just play around with getting various shapes on the canvas. Doesn't have to be anything specific, but For me, I think the more little intricacies like that you add, just the end poking up instead of just being a straight line, it just adds so much more interest for your viewers and makes them look for just a little bit longer. Maybe it's that few seconds you need to get someone interested in your work. So I always try to add in those tiny little extra things. So we have an E, so we're just going to do a rectangle and a rectangle, and there's our E. We can do an oval and a triangle, and that's an R. So that's the cool thing about block lettering, is it's really just erasing ovals, triangles, and rectangles, and that's what makes a shape. You can really make, I think, any letter out of those. I'll probably correct myself in a minute when I make a letter and say, oh, that's not the shape, but here's an oval, a rectangle. Let's add a line. Sometimes you have to do lines. And the H. The U is really just a partial oval. And then we'll bring that line down for our N. Triangle at the top and a triangle at the bottom. I think also these can be a little bit messy. Your letters don't have to be perfect, of course. The goal is to kind of get that rough and chunky feel. So if you feel like your letters aren't perfect, that's really okay. See how this Y ended up kind of dipping down? I think that just adds some really nice visual interest. So if you back up, the Y isn't in line with all the other letters. It kind of got shifted down, which I think is just a fun little addition. Once you get rolling with these, it just really goes quickly. I will sometimes line up a bunch of quotes, so I'll have 10 or 15 quotes just on canvases ready to use, and then I can sit and just do some block lettering with them. And this is a great thing to post online for just some fun short quote, and especially if you are in the mood to create something but you're feeling like creative block. I think block lettering is one of those just playful processes that can help you get out of your own head, which is probably one of the biggest problems that creatives have, is just you get down, you get stuck in your own head, and you feel like you can't create anything. So just do something loose and fun for that day, because clearly you're not in the mood to do something serious on a day like that. So I need to figure out how to do this N. So I think it's gonna shoot over that way. Sometimes you need to really accentuate the triangles in the N to make it look more like an N. So that's better. That helps this kind of jump up here. And of course you can always add some back in if you feel like you went too far. Sometimes I'll just kind of add in a little piece here and there. And the G, all you really need to do is down like that. You can do another piece to add that extra little line to the G, but you don't have to. I'm going to round out that G so it looks a little more G-like. Let's make the sketch invisible and look around. So I'm happy with that. I think that looks pretty cool. I'm ready to start coloring. If this was like real life, I would go through and zoom in and clean up all these little super sharp edges. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me do that though, because that would be really boring. But let's say we're ready to jump in and add some color. So I'm going to create a new layer below that layer. Let's fill that with a color. And I'm going to grab a contrasting color here and, whoops, wrong layer, back on this peach layer, and I'm just going to drag every other color is going to be this gold. One thing with block lettering to be careful with is that all your letters are legible. If you're not sure, you might send it to somebody and say, what do you think this says? And if they can't tell you, then you maybe need to do a little bit more refining on your block. One last thing you might like to add is some texture. So I created some texture brushes that you can use here. I'm going to get the crayon streaks one. Bump that in and then go to that layer and play around with the blend modes. So tap on that end symbol. Ooh, I kind of like that. Multiply and then turn it down. That's some nice texture. But I always like to look at all the blend modes before I commit to one. That one's kind of nice too. So play around with the textures, play around with the various blend modes. I kind of like this because it shows up as a different color on each one. So that might be my final. That's very summery. So that is your basic block lettering. I just want to show you all a few examples because I've created some of these and just played around with them. So first of all, same process, different shape, different quote. And you can see I did some small letters, some big chunky ones to kind of get that variation in. I've done the same thing, but I really rounded these, so it gives it a totally different feel to just go through and really round each letter. And then I just did some various color versions of this same kind of style that we did today. So definitely play around with color options. You can see that it totally changes the feel of the composition. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please share your block lettering with me at Liz Kohler Brown on Instagram and Facebook. And I can't wait to see your work. Bye-bye.